Here to keep the chase going, share information, spread unity, preserve our heritage and our culture. We're trying to achieve something that you just can't catch. We're always trying to find a better way, trying to make better dogs. That's what Dixie Doggers Podcast is. That's who we are.
This episode is brought to you by Rankin Ranch 38 Cattle Company. Marc Rankin specializes in Brahma and Brahma Cross cattle in Oglethorpe County, Georgia. You can contact him at 407-832-2077. 407-832-2077. This episode is also brought to you by Phil Wilson of UC Hunting Properties. If you're buying or selling land, farms, or hunting property, these folks know land. You can contact him at 678-791-3483, 678-791-3483, or visit his website down below in the description.
All right, everybody. We got Nate and Joey here with you again. Dixie Doggers Podcast coming at you. This is our segment with Mr. Bob Plott tonight. We're going to talk about Frank Methvin, and he's going to talk about it. I'm going to listen and learn, just like you guys are going to listen and learn. And I would like to take one little time right here to give a shout out to all our Australian people that are listening. I've been getting messages and stuff like that from the guys in Australia. We get a lot from the U.S. too. So, I mean, I love all you guys, but we really appreciate it. And one of the guys was asking about some Plott hounds. So, Mr. Norman, this is for you. And Mr. Bob, right. Go ahead and lay it on him. How you doing, buddy?
All right. Hey, I'm good. How about you guys?
Doing good.
Good. Well, that's pretty impressive. Australia, that's a new one for me. I've gotten emails and messages and letters from about everywhere else, but I don't think I ever got one from Australia before. So that's good. I'm glad to welcome to the club there. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yep.
Well, like you guys said, I'll jump right into it. Mm-hmm. Tonight, I want to primarily talk about Frank Methvin. And, of course, Frank is the guy who started the Methvin Award, the oldest big game Plott award, the longest running big game Plott award that's ever been. He started in 1955, and it's still going strong today. So what I want to do, a lot of people don't know about Frank nowadays because obviously he's been dead for a few years, but I met him when I was a young man. I was in my 30s when I first met him. And I say met him, I never actually met him face to face until later, and I'll tell you that story tonight too. But we exchanged a lot of phone calls and correspondence and had just a huge amount of respect for the man. And he was kind of known as the first really big, true Plott breed ambassador to the world, so to speak, because he had been in the business so long. He started writing his first articles in 1955 and wrote those for over 50, almost 60 years, and just did a lot of amazing things, which I want to share with you tonight. But I doubt there's anybody that's ever done more for the breed as far as getting the word out there about it and letting people know about it than Frank did. So he wrote for Full Cry and American Cooner magazine for well over 50 years. He wrote, I don't know how many books, several books. He's also a really good poet. I'm not much into poetry, but his stuff was actually really good, and or I liked it anyway. And he came up with this idea for the Methvin Big Game Award, which began in 1955. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the longest and most prestigious big game Plott award. But it's different than any other one, too, which is one thing I really like about it. It's not just based on the guy who's out here killing the most big game, which that's a part of it. But Frank put a great deal of emphasis on sportsmanship, of bringing new people into the game, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to be a good breeder, but if you're a good breeder, that carried some weight too. He really looked at the contributions to the big game world and to the Plott breed as a whole. And he really wanted to start the award based on honoring his father and his grandfather. And he turned that award over to the APA. It started out as he gave the award in conjunction with the MPHA starting in probably not till 1959, because I don't think the MPHA was going too big until then. But from the late 50s, early 60s up until 2010, it was strictly an MPHA endorsed award. And I'll give you some ideas about that, or explain that to you too.
Okay.
Frank, as I said, I'd never met him personally, but we had gotten to be really good friends via phone calls and messages, handwritten letters, that type of thing for 20 years. And he was getting some age on him. He'd fought cancer. He'd beat it several times, and he was in his late 80s. And he said he would love to come to APA breed days. And so I got as much money as I could get together. I priced some plane tickets, hotel rooms, whatnot. And I got two people to help me a little bit. Rodney Burris gave some money, and so did John Jackson, but I gave the bulk of it and basically paid for him not only to come to breed days, APA breed days, but also I bought copies of all his books so he could sell. So he got to sell all those too. And he laughed after he came there that year and told me, he said that was the first time he'd ever been on a trip where he took more money home with him than he brought with him.
That's a pretty good trip.
Yeah, because we bought his food, paid for his hotel, plane ticket, and like I said, I even bought the books, and he sold the books and gave him the money for it. So he was just, I've never seen anybody more excited or more thrilled. I think he was 89 then, if I recall correctly. And here was little old man, he had made this, literally cross country trip from Washington State to Charlotte. We picked him up in Charlotte, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and special in so many ways, because obviously I got to meet him for the first time face to face, but it was also the first time that he was able to meet probably 15 living Method Award winners, men that he had given the award to over the past years, but that he'd never had a chance to meet personally.
Wow.
So that was a real thrill to see him. I've got some photographs of him with Bud Line and Dwayne Smith and Cheyenne Hill and just a whole bunch of guys like that had won former Method Award winners. So it was really Gene Walker. So it was really just such a treat to see him. I've just never seen anybody. You just have to know Frank and see Frank. Looking at him, you would never have guessed that he was the hunter he was. He was a very small man. He was probably only 5'8" if he was that, and he just looked like your grandfather. Just always just wore glasses, just had this smile on his face all the time. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy. So he was really getting concerned though when he came to breed days. He saw the emphasis in what we were doing. Even though we certainly supported and endorsed coon hunting, our emphasis was on big game hunting, and he was concerned that the MPHA had gotten away from that a little bit, and so he wanted to move the award to the APA. Well, I knew right off the bat that was going to cause a lot of trouble, because first of all, because I was involved in it, and second of all, at that time, now the APA and MPHA get along better, but back then, they were like Israelis and Arabs. I mean, they just weren't, it was not good. And so so I told him, I said, well, Frank, if you want to do this, it's your award. You can do what you want to do with it, but you're going to have to send them a certified letter telling them that you made this decision and that you're making it of your own free will, that me or nobody else in the APA had anything to do with it. And he did. And so we ended up taking over the award. Or APA is an APA endorsed award. I guess they didn't take it over, but they didn't have any say so in choosing it. But they took it over that same year. Well, Frank was also getting concerned about the fact he knew, having survived cancer 2 or 3 times, and the fact he was 89 years old. He knew he wasn't going to live forever, and so he didn't want to see the award, you know, end. He was afraid if he died, that would be the end of it. And he had been going since 1955, and so he was really worried about the future of the award. So he approached me at breed days that year, and we talked about it on the phone several times afterwards. He said, "Would you promise me that you will take the award over for me? In fact, you can take." He said, "I want to give it to Gordon Larson and Jerry Tuller, but," he said, "after we give it to them, I want you to take it over." And I said, "Well, I'd be honored to, but I just want to make sure that, again, that's something you want to do." And he said, "Yeah, that would mean a lot for me if you would." And I said, "Well, not only will I do it for you, but I'll make plans that, if something happens to me, there's a backup so that we'll make sure this thing goes on for good." And he said, "Well," he said, "I want to put one more stipulation into it too." He said, "After we give it to Gordon and Jerry," he said, "I want to make sure you win it." And I said, "No, no, 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 no." I said, "There's no way that I'm going to do that." I said, "I greatly appreciate the honor and would love to have won it. But," I said, "people again will misconstrue this and swear that I convinced you to do it or that I picked myself or something like that. And this is not worth that hassle to me." And so we finally just agreed to disagree on that, and we didn't do it. So, and I'm glad we didn't. It was the right thing to do. So, I guess I took it over in 2012, maybe something like that.
Yes, sir.
But he had a really interesting family tree too, and so I want to tell you a little bit about that too. He was born in Kentucky in 1920, and he was kin. He explained this to me, but I don't remember the exact specifics. But through his father and mother, he was kin to both the Hatfields and the McCoys of the Hatfield and McCoy feud. So he had a kind of interesting tie-in there historically. And then he told me, which Frank never lied about anything, so I knew he was telling me the truth. But I kind of wondered about this one until I checked it out, and it was true. He had another relative that was a Henry Methvin, who was a member of the Bonnie and Clyde bank robbing gang.
Oh man!
And Henry had actually played a hand in the FBI or G-men, FBI, whatever.
Yeah,
got Henry and convinced him to
that's right.
turn state's evidence, and basically they set up the ambush due to Henry where they were killed. So that was one of Frank's direct descendants. So he also had a real interesting tie to Plott Hound family history too. And this was even before he was born. His father and his grandfather rather, and his uncle John had a hunting cabin in the community of Alarka, North Carolina, which is right outside of Bryson City, North Carolina, not far from where I grew up. And they hunted there often. And they also hunted near Black Mountain in what's now the Pisgah National Forest in 1908. And they hunted with Montreal Plott and his 12-year-old son, Vaughn Plott, and their Plott dogs. So that was the first time the Methvins had really gotten a taste, or firsthand. They'd always liked hunting with hounds, but they never had really been too deeply involved with Plotts till that time. So they got the bug bad, and were into it from that point forward, which of course that got Frank interested into it as well to some degree. So Frank moved to Ohio, or his family moved to Ohio when he was a boy, and he began working in the radio industry, doing DJ work and doing different things. And then when World War II broke out, he served in the Coast Guard. And when he returned from the war, he met his future wife in San Diego, California, Jean, and they settled there after the war. And Jean had an interesting historical background too. She was a direct descendant of Daniel Boone. So you had this whole, really, to me anyway, really interesting history.
Yeah.
A back history of hunting, but not so much with Plotts other than the Montreal and Vaughn tie-in. But while he was on the West Coast in about 1947, he met a guy named Stuart Surratt, and Stuart was a big name on the West Coast and with Plott hounds, and really, really, really big name out there. And so he started hunting with Stuart and his dogs, and they expanded their hunting range into Washington State. And it was there that he met Ray Jones, who was from North Carolina originally, Doyle DeMoss, Jerry Tuller, and Ed Watkins. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second. But this was about 1955 when this took place, and he started riding for Cooner in 1955, and he also began the Methvin Award in 1955. So he was now getting pretty deeply entrenched into the Plott dog world. He then met Gordon Larson in the late 1950s, and Larson and Frank hunted a lot together, and Larson really taught Frank a lot about Plott dogs. And it kind of prompted Frank, before Frank made this move, though, he was pretty well known on the West Coast. He still was working in the radio industry, and he was somewhat of a celebrity. He met a lot of famous people, boxers like Archie Moore, a lot of entertainers. Yeah, I mean, he was pretty well known, and he used that kind of platform to let people know about big game hunting and Plott hounds and that sort of stuff.
How many people do you think know who Archie Moore is, Mr. Plott?
Probably not many, but he was a heck of a boxer.
What was it, 139-0?
Yeah, something like that. It was
139-2 or something. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see a fellow boxing fan there because, I mean, like you said,
he was a corner man too.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah,
and later on actually did some refereeing too. I think
for Ali.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
No,
that's
yeah,
right.
That's cool. I'm glad you brought that up. Not many people would even know that.
No, I'm glad. That's good. That's pretty neat.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, so he was using that platform. He met Joey Bishop and Dean Martin and all these other people, and there's a lot of other famous athletes in addition to Archie Moore as well. But he moved to Redmond, Washington, in Washington State, and opened up a restaurant there. I believe he called it the Lion's Claw. And he bought a farm, and he called the farm Glen Carin. And Glen Carin, it's Glen-Carin, means Rocky Glen in Scottish. He also named it for the site in North Carolina where his family hunted with Mont Plott and Von Plott in 1908. It was an area called Rocky Glen there in the Pisgah National Forest. And it was also in Washington State that he met Homer Wright. And Homer was from North Carolina, and Homer had worked on Vaughn's Plott's farm and got Plott dogs from Vaughn. And we generally, Homer's credited with taking some of the earliest or first Plott dogs into that Darrington, Washington area. He was some kind of hunter. He and his son both. That was just a hotbed for big game. They had cougars, they had bear, they had bobcats, and they hunted coon too. So it really spoke to the multi-purpose capabilities of the dogs. And Weyerhaeuser Lumber was paying a bounty on bears because the bears were digging up the saplings for the timber, the trees they were planting for paper. And so all these guys from North Carolina moved out there. I mean, not only was Homer out there, but Ray Jones and Bud Hite, both of them were from North Carolina. Ray was actually kin to the Reese family. If you remember, we talked about the Reese family having the wet dogs. Well, he was actually related to them. And then Bud Hite was actually kin to my family, the Plott family. In fact, Hite Creek is the next creek over from Plott Creek in Haywood County.
Okay.
Now, Ray was as big a gentleman as Frank was. I mean, just super polite and never cursed. Ray was about like Von Plott. He was about as crusty as they came, and he lived to be about 96 years old. And I talked to him on the phone regularly until he died. And He was just a treasure, man. I'll go over some numbers these guys put together in a minute, but what they did, nobody can. I don't think anybody ever surpassed the stuff they did as hunters. I mean, it was just remarkable, and the dogs they had were just, I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But two of Frank's best dogs were a dog called Old Coke and another one called Tony. And they came from Homer Wright and from Ray Jones. And Frank would tell you right up front, he would make it, he made no secret about it. He never claimed to be a breeder, but he knew so many people from his books and his magazine articles and everything else that he was always getting really good dogs. And he was very, very critical of them. I mean, he really held them to a high standard. And I'll tell you a funny story. When he knew, before my first book came out, I told him I was writing the book, and he was really excited about it. He said, you know, something needed to be done. And anyway, one day I came home from work and I found this big apple box on my front porch from Washington State. And I thought, what in the world? Somebody sent me apples or something, you know? But what it was Frank had sent me just this whole huge box full of old photographs, documents, pedigrees, and everything else. Now, every article that he'd ever written, a copy of every article he'd ever written. I mean, it was just a treasure trove of information, man. I mean, I could never thank him enough. But while I was sorting through this just, treasure chest of archives, I came across this document, and it was about, I don't know. I've never really counted it, but I've got it here in my hand right now. But it was probably 50 pages, and it was handwritten. And Frank had, and I won't go over the whole thing with you, but just for 3 years now, keep this in mind, guys, this is just 3 years. Actually, it was 9 years. But he hunted for, 50 years. But in 10 years, he kept a record of just a few of these dogs. And it was just amazing what they were able to achieve. Between 1967 and 1972, Frank by himself, he was with other people, but this was just his dogs. He had 444 bears killed in 9 years.
Good night.
87 cougars, 159 coons, and I don't know how many bobcats, a bunch of them. And when you just, thumb through this, most of his dogs didn't live to be more than 3 or 4 years old because they were getting killed by bears. He hunted in Alaska. He hunted in Idaho. He went out in Idaho and he hunted with Pete Ellsworth, George Ricks, some of those boys there that were big Plott men. He had two great dogs named Zeb and Jethro that were killed in Alaska. Mm-hmm. But going back to the logbook a minute, just thumbing through it, I mean, he goes through Coquette, this female dog. Tony was his favorite, and Tony was in on over 250 bear kills. He had, he just goes on. I mean, it's just page after page. Another dog lived for 1 year and was on 35 bears, 12 coons, and 11 cats. I mean, yeah, I mean, Battle Cry was a dog that he got from directly from Von Plott. Bud Line had got the Battle Cry and had sent it to Bud, and that became, to Frank, and that became one of his favorite dogs too. Only lived to be 3 years old, and I'll read you the eulogy he wrote for Battle Cry. But Battle Cry was in on, let's see, trying to thumb through this. 107 bear kills, 52 coons, and 32 cougars or bobcats in 3 years.
Wow.
And
I thought the
I'm sorry,
coon
go ahead.
count would be, I thought the coon count would be higher, but I guess back in them days, a lot of people ate coons. Like
They
nowadays, if you reverse that, now you would kill 444 coons versus 189 bears instead of the opposite, like they did.
Yeah,
I figured the coons would be higher as well. That's all I was saying. I guess it's just people ate them more.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And now, thanks to the sponsors and friends of Dixie Doggers. Animal Housing Solutions.
Boars N Broads.
Crockett Taxidermy.
Hardcore Hog Dogs.
Southern Cross Cut Gear.
Ada Y Transport.
4L Kennels.
The American Doghorn Museum.
Unique Hound and Hunting Supply.
Hogbaying.com.
Tuskers Magazine.
Mud Creek Hog Dog Trials.
With that, plus you got to understand where they were. I mean, the Weyerhaeuser lumber had a bounty on bears.
Mm-hmm.
Cougars and bobcats were prevalent, and these guys, they didn't mind hunting coons, but they really loved hunting big game. So anything else aside from big game was kind of secondary. Whereas, if you look around places that don't have bear or much bear, you're going to see a whole lot more coon hunting going on just because it's, the sport of choice. It's the only thing you got really available to you.
Okay.
But out there, that was just the emphasis. And so I think it was more along the lines, not so much that they didn't have them. They did eat them, but I think that the emphasis was more on, our focus is on big game, really. And,
they were getting paid. They had the bounty on them, so they're getting paid to knock them out.
Yeah, they weren't getting paid anything. They weren't getting paid anything for the coons, so, but, it goes on. I won't go through the whole 50-page thing with you, but there was, the notes I found there were just so interesting because he'd gotten a dog from Glenn Buchanan and he, that he just didn't like, and he explained why he didn't like him. And then he talked about other dogs that he'd gotten and why he liked them. And one 2-year-old dog had been in on 31 bear kills in 2 years. And he talked about how he wasn't a real fast dog, but he had a good nose and had good stamina. And so it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Another in the year, another one's on 15 bear, 15 cats, and 8 coon. I mean, just goes on and on and on. And so, like I said, when you get back to the, he didn't even keep these records just for this. He didn't keep any records before this time. And I don't think he kept too many. He kept some after that, but not a lot. And so, and the funny thing about this was he wasn't sending this to me going, hey, look at me. He just kind of had it in there as an afterthought. And when I started thumbing through it, and I started, out of curiosity, I just started doing the tallies and seeing what the totals were. I started seeing these totals from 67 to 72. I mean, that's what, 5 years?
Yeah,
so it wasn't even 10 years, I said 10 years earlier. I stand corrected. This was from 1967 to 1972.
5 years.
444 bears.
God almighty.
87 cougars, 159 coons.
That's what, 80 something bears a year, 85 bears a year? Well,
yeah, averaging that. Well, funny story about that. Ray Jones came back home to North Carolina during the holidays, one Christmas, and he went to visit Taylor Crockett. Taylor was a big Crockett Plott dog man. Everybody loved Taylor's dogs, especially hog dogs, great hog dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, Mr. Crockett was pretty well known for being able to spot a BS artist, and but he hit it off with Ray right off the bat. He could see clearly that, you know, Ray was from Western North Carolina. He really knew his stuff, was a hard hunter. And at some point they got around to dogs, and you know, Taylor said, well, you know, I will definitely sell you or even give you a dog, because I think, you know, you're serious and you'll put it to work, and I'd like to see what they do out west. And he goes, you know, how often do you use them, and how many bears do you kill? And, you know, Ray didn't even blink an eye. He said, well, we average about 75 a year. And Mr. Crockett said, what? And he said 75. Yeah. So that's a bad year. So, you know, sometimes we'll kill 100. And we've been doing that for 10, 15 years and still doing it. And Crockett just couldn't believe it. He thought for sure this guy is just completely lying. You know, nobody could kill that many bears in that period of time. You know, that would just be impossible. But it wasn't. It was true. And that was the other thing I found that was so interesting, having the opportunity to talk to Ray myself and get to know him over the years was really, really special. But this cast of characters, man, that Frank was hunting with, you couldn't make them up. I mean, you had Buck Buchanan, Glenn Buchanan. He was from East Tennessee, I think. Big mountain man from East Tennessee, great hunter. They had a guy named Ed Watkins, and his nickname was Pure Hate, because they said that he was 190 pounds of muscle and the rest was pure hate. So he was just mean. He'd get in fights all the time with in bars and stuff. And Frank talked to me. One of Frank's classic quotes that said he'd picked him up many times, hungover, haggard, and horny from partying all night. But said he'd be the first guy out in the woods that morning.
That reminds me of a fella I know. They call him Carter Schultz.
Yeah. We won't go there. But anyway, but unfortunately, he worked in the steel industry, and he had got some lung problems. He died at an early age, only 47 when he died. But anyway, like I say, Frank had hunted with all these people and had really just done some incredible things. So he, over the next, you know, years, he continued to get great dogs from Plott legends. And he said 3 of his best dogs were Tony, Cinder, and Battle Cry. He got Tony from Ray Jones in 1958. Tony was in on 250 bear kills. He got Cinder from Clyde Neater, and I never got the total on that one, but they were probably along the same lines. But one of his favorite dogs was a dog called Battle Cry, and Battle Cry came directly from Vaughn Plott's farm. Vaughn had bred him, and Bud Line shipped Battle Cry to Washington to give to Frank. And so Battle Cry was in on 107 kills in just 3 years, and was before he was killed, you know, by a bear. And so it was, you know, pretty interesting to think. There's a picture of some of my books of Battle Cry, but Frank was really, really moved by the gesture of Bud shipping the dog, you know, directly from Vaughn's farm in Plott Valley. And so, and Frank's told me, he said Battle Cry was his all-time best strike dog. And like I said, he was in on 107 bear kills before he was lost on a bear hunt at the age of 3. Now, it's kind of interesting to note that he called Battle Cry a classic strike dog and a long staying dog. And ironically, Battle Cry and Vaughn Plott died at about the same time, and actually Vaughn died a little bit before that. But anyway, Frank wrote this eulogy to Battle Cry that he put in his magazines, and it reads like this. Basically, he was addressing it to Vaughn Plott, and he said, Plott's battle cry is now with you, Mr. Vaughn Plott, for you are the man responsible for his creation. Battle Cry was an outstanding dog. He was hunted with men and their dogs from over half the United States and several foreign countries. He was a proud dog. His sole dedication was that of hunting bears. Battle Cry is now with you, Mr. Plott, as he was as a puppy. He will remember your voice. Speak to him of soft, warm days and fresh, clean streams, of clear blue skies and honest men's laughter. Talk to him of towering mountains, of winding rivers, of Plott voices that sound through the shadows of the night, and of remembered winds of a legendary day. That was his heritage and the spirit of his heart. You gave Battle Cry to the bear dog hunting world. He now returns to you after a brief life of achievement. I miss him, Mr. Plott, but I know you are pleased to have him and all the others there with you. He bore your name proudly, and your knowing hand now rests upon his worthy head. And I thought, man, that's powerful stuff there.
That is. That really is.
Yeah. So I was talking to Frank, and I actually put this in one of my books too. I asked him, I said, what are some of the important lessons that you could pass on to myself and the future generations of Plott hound hunters? And as usual, he had a really eloquent response. He said that you got to breed to the best to get the best, and never breed a dog until it's proven itself first in the woods. And he said, don't ever forget, without a good dog, you are nothing. I've never seen a hunter yet that can strike or tree a bear by himself. Dogs are everything. So, it was just that sort of stuff. You just love being around him for that sort of knowledge and that sort of thing. So, as I said, he was getting older, and he'd been sick, and I think he knew that, things were. He didn't have probably that much time left. His wife had died in 1988, and that was real hard for him to take. And finally, in 1989, he really decided he couldn't physically do a lot with his dog, so he gave a lot of them away, and he quit bear hunting. But he also had, you hear a lot of stories about the Cascade line of dogs that Doyle DeMoss started, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail about this, but that breed of dogs, there was a lot of controversy behind those dogs. Not because they weren't great dogs, they were, and still are a great line, but there was some controversy as to whether or not DeMoss actually bred those dogs himself, or if somebody else did and he took credit for it. I don't know. I wasn't there. Frank had some very strong opinions about that he pretty much wrote in one of his books that if anybody wants to read, they can, but I won't get into that. But he knew a lot about those guys, and he hunted with DeMoss a lot. He knew a lot about the Cascade Big Timber dog. He ended up with Oliver Smith and with Gene White later. But he was really had a lot of respect for the line and for that breed, but he didn't feel like that Doyle was always honest, even though Doyle was a great hunter, and Doyle had went to Japan and killed Asian bears there and was hailed as a conquering hero. Man, they gave him samurai swords and stuff for killing these bears. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, as his life started to kind of fade a little bit, he continued to fight cancer, beat it back repeatedly, and even though he couldn't hunt anymore, he still was writing his articles on a regular basis, and he continued to promote the Plott breed. He continued to promote the Meffin Award, and he really remained an inspiration and mentor to any of us that were lucky enough to know him, whether it was personally or through his articles or whatnot. But 3 years prior to his death. I think I said it was 89. It was actually 88 when he came. He came along cross country in March 2008, and he came to breed days. And like I said, I paid for the bulk of his bill, but John Jackson and Rodney Burse kindly assisted me. And there were no fewer than 11 former Methvin Award winners there to meet him at for the first time face to face. I mean, at one point, I remember vividly, there was Bud Line, there was Dwayne Smith, there was Cheyenne Hill, there was Steve Hurd, there was Jim Feaster, Gene Walker, Steve Fielder, Elliot Bice, and John Jackson all gathered around Frank to talk. So, it was just so amazing to see that and experience that and, be a part of it. So he was just such a special guy. And like I said, he continued to be involved with the award until his death. He talked about Plott dogs right up to his death. I talked to him 3 days before he died. He was in an assisted living center by then, and he was still carrying that Plott Hound torch to his grave. But when he died, the 1972 Methvin Award winner, Bud Line, who was a dear, dear friend and mentor of mine, he said, I don't think anyone's ever done more to promote and perpetuate the Plott breed better than Frank Methvin. And I totally agree with that. I think he was, we've been lucky to have a lot of great people who've written, stories, books, done different things, but, Frank did it all and did it eloquently and did it as a gentleman and really emphasized the sportsman aspect of it. And, I'm just proud, honored to be able to carry that award on for him in his passing. He died in 2011 at the age of 91. So he certainly led a tremendous life. And just to give you an idea real quick of the awards, the Methvin Awards, to give you an idea of a few of the winners. He started giving it in 55. The first 4, or actually 5 awards that he gave it to were all to original Plott family members. He gave one to Johannes George Plott, who's generally, believed to be the originator of the breed, my 3rd great-grandfather. Henry Plott, my great-great-uncle. John Plott, who was Montraville Plott's father, and then Montraville Plott the next year, and then John Amos Plott, Vaughn Plott's oldest brother, in 1959. And from that point forward, he gave them to Gola Ferguson, Isaiah Kidd, Taylor Crockett, Vaughn Plott, Sam Plott, Hack Smith Deal, Rags Nichols, Dale Brandenberger, Benny Moore, Herbert Plott, Kermit Allison, Everett Weems, Bud Line, Leroy Hogue, Ray Jones. List just goes on and on and on. Dwayne Smith in 83. Andy Blankenship won it in 1986. You guys know Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Elmer Allen, Ernst and Jim Polly, Clyde Bounds in 91, Gene White in 94, Eugene Walker in 96, Charles Gant 2001, Wayne Allen 2004, Roy Clark in 2010, Hoyt Dillingham 13, and Cletus Brown in 2014, and then later on, I think you guys know Ira Jones and Clay, his father. I made sure they won it, and then, like I say, since then we've had really a bunch of great winners, including Jay Wallets, Gary Bowen. The list goes on and on and on. And this year, I'm real pleased. I can't announce it yet. We've already announced already picked the winner for this year, and it'll be given at Breed Days, APA Breed Days in March. And then since we do Plott Fest, we give a second trophy at Plott Fest for that too. So since 2012, we've given 2 trophies. We've given the APA has given 1, and Well, actually, the APA trophy goes back to 2010, but since 2012, we've given 2 trophies. We've given one by the APA and then one that I give for at Plott Fest every year. So we're real excited about that. So
Yeah, that's gonna be nice.
So it's just, I go on, but that just kind of gives you an idea of just a little bit about, you know, who Frank was, what he meant to me personally,
Mm-hmm.
what he meant to the breed as a whole. Because, just to all of your listeners anywhere, I mean, I've got 4 or 5 these big, huge 3-ring binders. That he sent me copies of every single article he'd ever written, and it's just a wealth of information, all of them, and they're very well written, very articulate, and then to think he was doing that at the same time out there just killing it in the woods, man. I mean, just wow. I mean, it's just
Knocking them out.
nobody I know, anybody I've ever seen that's seen that to a man has said, that's just a record that nobody ever duplicate. I mean, I'm sure actually Ray Jones probably did better than that, but I mean, but that whole group, I mean, there's just, I don't think anybody, could even come close to replicating or duplicating that record. I mean, it's insane to think that they would do that. And of course, they paid a pretty stiff price. I mean, they lost a lot of dogs because
Yes, sir.
they were going hard all the time. And some really, wherever you are, I don't care if you're in the swamps in North Carolina or the mountains in North Carolina or the mountains of out west, everybody, wherever anybody lives, they think that where they're living's the hardest place to hunt. And I guess everybody can make a good argument for that too. But certainly nobody can question the difficulty of the terrain and conditions those guys were hunting in. And keep in mind that they were all hunting before tracking collars, before people were riding around on 4-wheelers, and a lot of this area didn't have any, real roads. So, they were doing most of their work on foot, hard work on foot. So,
yeah, that'd be a lot of work.
Yeah, man. I mean, just amazing story. Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah, that was something new. I didn't know the history on that on the Methvin thing. I knew about the award and stuff, but like I said, I didn't know the history on it. And I'm glad you pushed that out there tonight, because I know there's a lot of listeners that don't know it, and there's quite a few that are they don't run hounds. A lot of hog hunters, they run cur dogs, but
right.
since you started this, having your slot on here, and there's a lot of people more interested. They call and ask me questions, or they'll message me and be like, "Hey, what do you think about this? And what about this? As far as a Plott hound, and they're wanting to start incorporating some, and they're really liking the history."
Yeah,
I know I do.
Well, I appreciate that. And like I say, feel free. Anybody wants to email me or anything like that. I can't guarantee I'll know the answer to the question, but if I do, I'll certainly try to help them. And because, like I said before, when we first started doing this, I want this to be our listeners' program. I mean, I can sit here and talk all day about stuff that interests me and hopefully interest you, but
That's right.
if it don't interest them, then it's not doing any of us any good. So, I just want to do stuff that's relevant to what they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always going to have to talk about history. I mean, it cost me my job at Full Cry, but that's too bad. I mean, I'm just going to, that to me is, if you don't know that, that's, especially if you're a Plott guy, if you're not interested in that, then you're not really interested in the breed, And,
that's what I think it goes. It's got to go hand in hand almost to me.
Yeah.
The nostalgia, the romance of a Plott hound, the big brindle dog, and in the mountains running bear or cats or hogs or whatever, or coons. Everybody that I've ever known, it always goes circles right back to the history of it. They're like, well, that Von Plott done this and that and blah blah blah. Well, we wouldn't know any of that if somebody wasn't there to relay the history to us.
Yeah, and the thing, we've talked about this a little bit before, but it's something I try I have to mention just simply because so many people have used the platform for the wrong reasons too.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people who sit there and say, well, I know this old man who knew Von Plott, and he said Von never did this and Von never did that. And I'm like, okay, well, who is this old man? Well, he's 75 or 78 years old now. And I said, well, that's interesting because he would have been 6 years old when Von was in his prime, so
Yeah.
obviously he doesn't know anything he's talking about. He was a baby basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you start calling people out like that, or you hear people like, well, I know this for a fact, Von Plott told my grandpa this. Well, maybe he did, but it's not consistent with anything else that he's ever told me, or anything he's ever, not just me, but anything that he's ever written about. I mean, he was written about as early as 1946, and none of the stuff that this guy was saying is consistent with stuff he was saying in 1946. So,
Yeah.
there's so many people use this type of history as a platform to justify themselves trying to make money off their kennels or their dogs. And, I just don't believe in that. I think, there's a great story here. That story needs to be told truthfully and honestly, warts and all, and let people know about it, because you're not going to find any more colorful characters and more colorful stories, and stories that go really hand in hand with the history of our country. I mean, with this Plott dog's official state dog in North Carolina, and I do school programs and stuff too. And I tell people, I've got photographs of Plott hounds from the 1870s. They look just exactly like my dogs today. And so, that makes me feel good, because I mean, to me, it's like when you're looking in the eyes of those dogs, or when you're petting their heads, man, you're touching the face of history.
Yes.
You're looking in the eyes of history, and that means something to me. And it's like, Howard Jones said it best one time. He said, if it ain't broke, you don't need to fix it. So I've never taken credit for any of it, never will. But it's just important for me to let people know what I believe to be the truth, and what I know to be the truth that I can document and prove. And if anybody can prove me wrong, then I'm all ears. I'm welcome to hear it.
I was going to say, you've always been very open about that ever since the first time we've talked. You're like, it's not that you want to argue and fight with anybody about nothing, but if they have something that's contradictory to what you're saying and they have proof of it,
yes,
then you want to know, because that's the history part of it. If it's something that's different, you really want to know.
And I've learned some really, in fact, the same book that's the story I wrote about Frankie, and it goes back to a story which will kind of lead into something else I want to talk about to kind of wrap things up tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Little George Plott was a hero of mine, and I never met him, but he was killed in action on Christmas Eve, 1944, fighting in World War II. And when I wrote a profile of him in one of my books, I found a picture of another young man with some dogs at John Plott's farm. And everybody said, oh, that's the little George. That's little George. I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, I've got, 50 or 60 pictures of little George, and that's not little George.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, well, John didn't have but one son and one daughter, so it's got to be little George. This guy was living with John. And I was like, well, he may have been living with him, but that ain't little George. So, but I didn't want to push it too much, because I couldn't really prove it one way or the other. And I got a phone call after that book came out, and lady told me, she said, I can tell you who that guy is in that picture right there. It's my daddy.
Wow.
Said his name's Jack Edwards, and he's a retired lawyer. He lives in Charlotte, and his John Plott's second wife was my daddy's father's brother. And Jack's father had lost his wife. He had had lost an arm in a logging accident. So he had 3 boys. It was in the 1930s during the height of the Depression, and he just couldn't support the boys. So he took all 3 of the boys to John Plott's house and his sister's house in Waynesville and said, "Look, pick one of them. I can't ask you to take all 3 of them, but take one of them." And so Jack was picked by John and his wife.
Wow.
And I kidded, after I got to meet Jack, I kidded him. I said, "Well, you were the pick of the litter, Jack." And and Jack lived there on the Plott farm, got there when he was 5 years old. He was several years younger than little George, but they grew up together like brothers, and that was him in that picture. And he told me just so many wonderful, wonderful stories about little George. And he fought in World War II as well. And of course, little George was killed in World War II. And I think I probably told you this story before too, but John Plott, his father died in 1959. And John had quite a collection of guns over the years. And when he died, his house was broken into, and most of those guns were stolen. And so I was down. So when I finally got to meet Jack, I went to Jack's house, and we got to be really good friends. And he was able to give me some more information where I was actually able to write even more about little George. And anyway, I was there one Saturday, and I told him, I said, I know that some of those old flintlock guns that John had were stolen because he died in 59, but I'd give anything to know where that German Mauser and that 1873 Winchester and that Stevens shotgun, double barrel shotgun, they had old John used the Stevens double barrel, and George used the Mauser and the Winchester, most predominantly the Mauser. And anyway, Jack said, "Well, I'll tell you exactly where they are." And he got up, walked over to a gun cabinet, and handed me all 3 of them.
Oh, man.
And I said, at first I didn't believe it, and I started looking at them, and I'm like, "No, this is it. There's no doubt about this." And then he pulls out a big wooden cheese box full of airheads that he and little George had collected when they were boys. And little George was a real good artist, and he had drawn pictures of animals and stuff on the wooden box. And then he gave me he showed me a whetstone, a German whetstone that John had used to sharpen his knife. So anyway, I was, obviously amazed to see those guns, took pictures of them and everything. And as I said, Jack and me got to be really close. And about 3 years after that, he called me the day before Christmas Eve, and he said, "Can you get down here tomorrow on Christmas Eve?" I said, "Well, if you need me there, I'll be there." And he said, "Well, get down here as early as you can." I said, "Okay." So I drove down there and got down there, and we had a good visit. And I took him out to lunch. We had some lunch and got back to the house, and I was getting ready to go back home. Wanted to get back home for Christmas Eve. And he said, "Well, I got something for you." He goes to his gun cabinet, pulls those 3 guns out, and had me all 3 of them. They're all 3 right here in my office right now. I'm looking at all 3 of them.
Oh, man.
And it just
awesome.
gives me cold chills talking about it even today. And by far and away I don't place a lot of emphasis on material stuff, but that's by far and away the best material gift anybody's ever given me. I mean,
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's very good.
But in keeping with Christmas, for those of you that don't know the story of little George Plott, he was Plott came from a military family, and pretty much everybody in the family had fought at one time or other. I never did, but my father was at D-Day. Little George fought in World War II. Little George's father fought in the Spanish-American War. His uncle fought. 2 uncles fought in World War I, and also on the Mexican border against Pancho Villa. So he grew up in this family where military service was really, really respected and expected of the young men. So as he got older, he joined the Army right around the time World War II started. And so he was a training officer all over the country. And of course, he was just phenomenal hunter. I mean, he he was on the 1935 Branch Rickey hunt. He seemed to have this ability to connect Vaughn Plott and John Plott. Vaughn was the youngest brother. John, Little George's father, was the oldest brother. And those two guys just could not get along. They lived less than a mile apart from each other and didn't speak to each other for 20 years. I mean, they just did not get along. But for somehow the other, Little George managed to bridge that gap between them. And he was on the 1935 Rickey hunt. Branch Rickey wrote a letter to Vaughn. I've still got it on St. Louis Cardinal letterhead talking about how special Little George was and the stamina. Rickey said that he made his living evaluating professional athletes, and that all those mountain bear hunters, Vaughn Plott, Little George, all those guys were some of the best athletes he'd ever seen. And of course, the dogs were just second to none. So George had grown up in that, very highly respected, and joined the Army. And one of the reasons he joined the Army was that he couldn't swim, and he was really scared of the water. So anyway, on 1944, things were kind of going bad for the American forces. They had landed in D-Day in June and advanced through France, but they were bogged down at the Battle of the Bulge, and it was snow on the ground, frigid conditions, pretty much surrounded by Germans, and they had to get reinforcements there as soon as possible. Well, they didn't have enough troop ships, American troop ships, so they had to contract private contractors to transport the troops from England to France. And so they contracted this ship called the Leopoldville, and it had a foreign captain who can speak English, and they were crossing the English Channel, and the ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat.
Oh.
Well, it didn't sink immediately. It did some damage to George's battalion. Was in the hold downstairs. He was on deck when the ship was hit, and he went up below deck to rescue his men 4 different times before the ship finally sunk, and he apparently drowned, and his body was never found. And it was over 2,000 men died that night, and it was that in itself is enough of a tragedy. But the sad part about it was the government covered it up because they didn't want anybody to know that they didn't have their own troop ships, and they didn't send anybody to rescue those guys because they didn't want to risk it. And so the only guys that got saved were actually local fishermen who risked their own lives and came out there and brought those guys in, and the rest of them, died there at sea. And about 15 years ago, I actually met a guy at Christmas who said, "I'll always remember where I was on Christmas Eve, 1944." And my ears lit up, and he said, "I was on Leopoldville with Captain George Plott." And I'm like, "What?" And so anyway, he tells me this vivid detail about what happened. And he says, "This guy, people talk about American heroes. They should have a postage stamp with his face on it. I mean, this guy was the real deal hero." So just amazing story. And so 2009, although his body was never found, one of my cousins and I got together and got the government to give us a monument to place beside his father and mother's grave. And so where at least he'd have a headstone there at Plott Creek. And he was a great horseman. He wanted to win a Kentucky Derby badly. And so we had a great ceremony there for him and gave the 20 gun salute and all that stuff. And so just a little bit of way to remember him. So, every year at Christmas, excuse me, I always, like anybody else, you think about Christmas, the reason for Christmas, birth of Christ, and you think about all the wonderful, family situations and things that you've enjoyed over the years, but I never fail to think about on Christmas Eve, 1944, where he was and how he died, and it's an heroic death as an American veteran hero. And I always try to remember that, remember him, and remember the other veterans like him who gave their lives so we can have our freedoms and have conversations like we're having right now. So,
Yes, sir.
So it's really, really means a lot to me to be able to tell his story, and especially have those guns. I mean, it's an amazing thing.
Yes, I couldn't imagine. Like you said, when just talking about it kind of gives me chills. Because I'm familiar with what they would look like. From just pictures of seeing those models, but I couldn't imagine like having the real one, the real deal right there in your hands. I bet that is just kind of surreal.
Well, I mean, and he's had the original clips. I mean, there were bullets from the Mauser. I mean, there were original bullets. There were shotgun shells from the original shotgun, Winchester shells from the original 1873 Winchester. I mean, it's just and the cool thing about it is, if you look at any of my books where those guys are photographed, those guns are just about every picture. Yeah. So, I mean, so it's like, here's on the Ricky hunt, there's little George with that Mauser, and here's John down the coast with that big old Stevens shotgun that he had slugs in to kill bears with. And there's a picture of Cody Plott carrying the Winchester and little George carrying the Mauser, looking at a bear track of a bear called Honest John, one of the biggest bears in western North Carolina that nobody was ever able to kill. So,
Goodness.
So it's just, stories like that, man, just, and to have that, and to, have that piece of history because I mean, the guns, the Winchester in particular is a fairly valuable weapon because it's old.
Yep.
The other two guns there's no real, I mean, there's plenty of old Mausers and plenty of old Stevens shotguns around, but not any that were carried by these guys, So to have that from somebody in my family, and to, that will be nothing. That'll be something that, if I have to sell everything I got, that will never be sold.
That's right.
That's just, that ain't going nowhere. So, but yeah, so it's like I say, I always try to remember that, in the holiday season, and remember those guys, because see, the other thing too, when that ship went down, the first thing the captain of the ship did was evacuate. He was the first guy off the boat.
Oh, he wasn't going down with the ship. He was getting on out of the way.
And he and all his crew members took all the lifeboats, and they had special life jackets that were on this boat, and they didn't have English instructions on them, so they had to be worn and inflated a special way, and most of these guys, didn't know how to do it. So, they were just the ones that even were able to get in the water without, drowning. Later, most of them drowned because they couldn't stay afloat long enough without a life jacket. And of course, it was cold. The temperatures were frigid, and one of the guys just described the conditions, said it looked like something from hell, just the boat burning and people screaming, and guys in the water and body parts. I mean, it was just terrible. So
I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah.
So many young men. I mean, men of all ages, of course, but I always put it into perspective like that. There was a lot of guys that were extremely young, from 16 to 18 years old to 20 years old in that area of life. And they're out there in ice water, freezing to death. There's slim to no chance of survival. They got to be scared out of their mind. And the ones that did survive, I've talked to a few guys that have been in different wars and stuff, and they don't really talk about it much.
No,
of course,
my father wouldn't.
It's my grandfather. He and I, we had a discussion one time, and you could tell that there was a lot of stuff that he wanted to leave there, but he couldn't. He came home with him.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing for those guys. So I have a lot of respect for those men. And like you said, especially like in a situation like that with little George and what he's done, he needs to be remembered. And at these holidays, we need to remember everybody like that.
Oh yeah. And that's a great point. And, and there was so many, not just, that was a family member, but I mean,
Mhm.
Leroy Hogue, who was a good friend of mine. In fact, he came to Plott Fest 3 years ago, on his 100, I think he was 101.
Wow.
And he was at Battle of the Bulge. So literally little George was coming to the Battle of the Bulge to, support him. And Leroy should have got the Medal of Honor, man. He took out 2 or 3 German gun nests and, just incredible. I mean, I wrote a story about him in 2 different magazines and in a book too. And he died on the operating room table twice from wounds.
My goodness.
But they brought him back to life. And his brother was killed in the Pacific. He was a Marine in the Pacific. He was killed in Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so it wasn't just. I mean, this was a common occurrence.
Yeah.
Through all Americans were experiencing this type of thing, and but to me, it's kind of ironic and interesting that people that were such great, important people in Plott history, Little George and Leroy, both being 2 of them that had those sorts of impressive military records.
They were great warriors too. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, and again, Little George was only 37 when he died. Good looking guy. But just, Jack told me so many stories about how he would beat the crap out of bullies that picked on people, and just a gentleman in every way. And Leroy here was this little unassuming guy that was just as polite as he could be. But, you could tell just by talking with him, he wasn't somebody you wanted to cross, and just these quiet warriors, man, the guys that could just, they weren't sitting around bragging about it or talking about it. They were doing it, and
That's right.
And had been through it and seen it and lived it. And so it was just, and, Leroy told me himself, he said, man, I'm not the hero. The guys that died are the heroes, So I said, well, I agree with what you're saying, but you're still a hero, man, for what you've done. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's, I appreciate your modesty, but, it's just, courage like that is pretty incredible when you think about it. So,
yeah, second to none. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So we, and then the other thing too is I kind of wrap things up, wishing everybody a Merry Christmas, but also reminding everybody that, we're starting to finalize things, for Plott Fest. We've got Plott Fest coming up May 17th in Maggie Valley, North Carolina at the festival grounds. And we've got special rates at the Comfort Inn there, right there, literally within 100 yards of the festival grounds for about $80 a night. You can get a room there. And of course, there's other hotels up and down the strip there that if you want to bring your dogs in your room, that there's a lot of hotels that'll do that. So, so we're counting on, hoping, got the insurance lined up now. We've got, ordering tents next week. And so, yeah, we're pretty far ahead of the game. Be looking for sponsors and sponsorships to help us defer some of the expenses. And, looking forward to having everybody join us. We're going to be a 1-day event from about 9 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night. There'll be music, dog events, round table discussions, crafts, pretty much a little bit of something for everybody. And you'll see probably 250 or more great dogs there and even greater people with them. And we're looking forward to having you boys join us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate you spending your time, letting us enjoy spending time with you, reviewing this history. It's really something I look forward to. Every few weeks, I'm like, man, this is getting good, and I keep catching myself because I want to get a book and sit down and read the whole, read everything that you've done. But then at the same time, it's like, well, if I do all that, then it won't nothing be new to me when I'm talking to you. So it's kind of something, you got something new to it. So I got to do both now. I got to get some books and I'm gonna read part of it, and then I'll talk to you about some of it. That way I can talk to you some.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to sell books, but I mean, I think
Oh, we need
one
to.
thing I found is that yeah, I mean, everything that I'm talking about is in the books, but there's a whole lot of stuff that I'm not even including here
Yeah.
that's in the books.
This
A
is
whole lot of
the
stuff.
minimized version of it.
Yeah. This is just kind of the Cliff Notes version, and I mean, and and there's stuff too that that it just never got in a book for whatever reason.
There you
Maybe it
go.
just didn't have the space for it, but it still applies to Little George, or still applies to Frank Meffin, or still applies to some other people or dog that we're talking about that, maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about here, but is either in the book, or if it's not in the book, it may be something that, if you ask me about it, it'll just come to,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I forgot about that. Let's talk about that, so,
That's right.
so there's always no shortage of topics, and even though we've got 6, soon to be 7 books, there's no shortage of information not in them and in them. So,
and books make a great Christmas gift, y'all. All the listeners out there.
yeah,
Books maker, and the best Christmas gifts would be get some books from Mr. Bob. Check out his books. Go ahead and get them. You better hurry up because Christmas is fixing to happen, y'all. You're wasting time. Get the books, put them in the stockings, hang them up there. Let's make it work.
I'll be happy to sign them for you and get them shipped to you as soon as it comes
That's
in.
right.
So, but whether you get it now or after Christmas, whenever it's and we'll have them sell at Plott Fest, and we'll have Plott Fest T-shirts and all that stuff too. And that money that we use for that just basically goes back to paying the bills. It cost us about. I say us, I'm talking about me.
Yeah.
When all said and done, when you start looking at all the expenses that go into stuff for a festival that size, between the rent and the insurance and deposits and all the other different things that security, liability, all the stuff that goes into it, you're going to not go get out of there for much less than $10,000.
Oh yeah.
And as long as it doesn't rain and we have a good crowd, we'll be fine. But the one time we have rain and nobody shows up, I'm gonna be hurting.
Yeah, that's
so.
Ain't no doubt. So everybody, make sure you put that on your calendars so we can get it going on. We want to make this the biggest one that they've ever had.
Yeah, man, and I think it will be. Like I said, we had people there from 21 different states and 7 or 8 foreign countries last year, and based on what I'm hearing this year, even more people are coming. So hope that's the case. And certainly it's going to be. We moved the time up to May 17th, so the weather will be probably. The weather was good last year, but I think that time of year is generally a little bit better, and you don't have to worry about cold weather as much in May as you do in April. So I'm excited about it. I think we're going to have a big time, and like I said, we'll have something for everybody. And the people that I'm just so pleased with the people who are showing up. I mean, we've had, like I mentioned before, we've had people like Eugene Walker, Andy Blankenship, Roy Clark, Ira Jones, Gary Bowen, Ken Ross. I mean, just Gary Beatty. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on of just this great Plott breed legends and just really super nice guys. And Dan Long, gosh, I mean, Roy Stiles. Like I say, the list just goes on and on and on and on.
Yes, sir.
And so we're real thrilled about that, and get an opportunity to meet a lot of people there that you normally don't get a chance to, and get a chance to meet the new Meffin Award winner, and just have a good old time.
It sounds like it. Sounds like a wonderful time. So, anything else that you want to add to it, or anything else you need us to do, you just let us know.
I just want to thank y'all so much for supporting us and giving us the opportunity and the platform, and really appreciate what you guys are doing, because I know there's a lot of time and effort on your part, money on your part to get this stuff done. And I think we need more people like y'all. I mean, and I think, I'll say one last thing real quick. You talk about, I'm a Plott guy. I'm obviously biased toward Plotts, but I love cur dogs. I've seen plenty of other great breeds of dogs that, so you never go hear me be one of those guys that, there's no other breed, because there are, and there's some good ones. And I love curs. I do. So, but, so don't let that, keep you from coming. Come to Plott Fest. You'll see, last year at the UKC bench show, we had red bones, we had walkers, we had Plotts. Now, we'll have a Plott King of Show and best all around Plott, but
Yes,
in the same way with the baying and treeing events, hey, best dog wins. Don't
there
matter
you
what
go.
color it is, what breed it is.
Yeah, I can. Like I said,
So,
we carried our little Yog Terriers to Plott days out there at Hickory Crossings, and we've competed out there. We've won some awards and stuff. It's a really good deal. We never miss the Plott Bay
yeah, man,
out there. We try to make that one every time.
It's a special thing. And then too, all the awards that you get when you win an award here at this show,
Yeah.
you don't just get those same old traditional trophies you get at most places. Corey Plott, again, Plott family member, is making pottery, these beautiful 18th century jugs with the name on it and the winner of the event. So take that home with you too.
Might have to drag a dog out and bring it up there and try to win me a little something.
Bring it on, man. And then of course, if you don't want to bring a dog and you don't want to run a dog, you just want to buy some of Corey's stuff, he'll have a tent set up there selling the stuff too.
Well, that's going to be awesome.
So that's really popular too. So like I said, man, we try to have something for everybody. Anything, if you like dogs and hunting, there's definitely something there for you. But you just want to come and get some good barbecue and food and see some authentic crafts and hear some good music, we got that too. So we got it all covered.
Can't beat that. So, all right.
But again, thank you guys so much, man, for everything y'all do for
yes, sir.
hunting and for the breed and everything y'all done for me personally. And hope y'all both have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll talk to you next year.
Same to you, buddy.
Yes,
you
sir.
have a good one.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yes, sir. You too.
Bye-bye.
10-4. Well, that's it'll be the last episode for Mr. Bob for the year. Be 2025. We'll be doing the next ones. We're trying to keep up. We're trying to keep pushing these out, trying to do the same old thing, the same old grind, to push and push and push. Like Mr. Bob was saying a while ago, it does take a lot of time to do these. Nate works a lot on this stuff. We tried to keep everything lined up to get guests lined up and to do all that. And then you have somebody cancel on you, or life just happens, and it's hard to make all of that work out. So there's times where we might not be able to put out quite as many episodes as we did in the past. I think we're going to cut it down to 2 a week and just roll with that as long as we can. And because that's what that in the reality of it, y'all, it's like I said, it takes a lot of time and it does cost money. And if y'all want to do some advertising, speaking to that part, that helps us. That will help us be able to produce more and to do more. Because, like I said, it takes so much time away from everything else. If we're not making any money, not getting paid, I ain't worried about really getting paid, but enough to keep this thing rolling. That's what it takes to make the world go round. So if you want to do some advertising or do any sponsorships or anything like that, holler at Nate or holler at me, something like that, and we can work it out and get you guys set up. But we appreciate y'all listening. Thank you for all the kind words and all the messages we get, man. We get them all the time. And from all over the world, man, it's crazy. And we love it. We love y'all. And I mean that. And since it's Christmas, eat dessert. Don't worry about the vegetables. Life is uncertain. You could choke to death on your broccoli. Eat your pecan pie.
Thank you. Hope y'all enjoyed that episode. Stay tuned for our new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. For questions, advertising, or just to chat, email DixieDoggers01@gmail.com.